Now, when we look at the hunger of the Prophet ﷺ and the companions, it is, of course, the case, before we get into the specific incidents where hunger was used against them, it is the case that the Prophet ﷺ was the hungriest man amongst the companions. He was the hungriest person amongst them. And of the signs of hunger that you'll start to see from the companions, extreme hunger, you have the hadith of Miqdad radiyallahu ta'ala anhu, who says, أقبلت أنا وصاحبان لي وقد ذهبت أسماعنا وأبصارنا من الجهل. That we came to the Prophet ﷺ, I and two companions, and we had lost our vision and our hearing from hunger. Or the hadith of Abu Hurairah radiyallahu ta'ala anhu, where he says that there were days that I was so hungry, I can remember passing out between the Prophet ﷺ's minbar and the Prophet ﷺ's home. What we know as the Rawdah, subhanallah, it is a garden of Jannah. And he remembered passing out. And he said, and I could remember someone coming to me and putting his foot, thinking that I was a madman, thinking that I had lost my mind, not realizing that it was nothing but hunger that caused me to collapse. This was the type of hunger that the best generation had ever faced, and the best person, Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam. Now I want to give you another perspective here with the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam. You know how we get cranky when we're hungry? When we start to become bothered more easily, we become irritated on a day of fasting once it hits the last 2 hours of the fast. Imagine the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam not eating for days. Days. Now think about all the shama'il of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Think about all the attributes of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. His smile, his laughter, his courtesy, his kindness, his compassion, his empathy, alayhi salatu wassalam, his just presence. You know, when you're hungry, you can't even be present in the gathering. The presence of the Prophet ﷺ, his body language towards people, his eyes looking at you, his ears listening attentively. And think about how much more of a miracle it is when you put that in the context of his extreme hunger, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And that's why when Allah Azza wa Jal mentions that there are people, تَحْسَبُهُمْ أَغْنِيَاء, you would think that they are wealthy, or you think that they're just fine, because of the way that they carry themselves. Most people did not notice the hunger of the Prophet ﷺ, because despite being the hungriest person amongst them, he acted like the fullest amongst them. You understand that concept? He manifests that ayah in the best of ways, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He was the hungriest of the companions, but at the same time, he didn't show it in his behavior. And that's why the central focus of Medina was Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. But there is the hadith of him going out at night and Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu finding the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam wandering around at night. And Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu was brought out by hunger. And he asked the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam what he was doing out at night. And he says, nothing brought you out except what brought me out. The focal point of Medina was Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, but not a soul could tell how hungry he was. Sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So you know the types of people that you're seeing right now. And look at the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Abu Talha radiallahu anhu mentioned hearing it in his voice. So the closer you got to him, the more of a muhib, the more of someone who loved the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam you became, the more you started to recognize the signs. So Abu Talha radiallahu anhu, the stepfather of Anas ibn Malik radiallahu anhu, when he comes to his wife Suleiman radiallahu anha and says, I heard the voice of the Prophet ﷺ and it sounded different. I heard the hunger in his voice. Or Jabir radiallahu ta'ala anhu noticing the bloating of the Prophet ﷺ, the bloating of a hungry person. When the Prophet ﷺ was malnourished and his stomach was poking out in a way that it did not before, not because it was full, but because it was empty, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So the signs were present. And the ahadith are so many. In 1 minute, you just run through them. What Aisha radiallahu ta'ala anha says, his wife, ما شبع آل محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم منذ قدم المدينة من طعام بر 3 ليال تباع حتى قبض صلى الله عليه وسلم. That the family of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam did not eat their fill of bread for 3 successive days since the day that he migrated to Medina to the time that he died. Now we know that the persecution period was when? The first half of the seerah. But his hunger, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, was most pronounced when he was most powerful, sallallahu alaihi wasallam,